Alright, the first thing I want to do is I want to save a little bit of my paper to make the snout out of, because I'm going to make that popping out. So I'm going to take one edge of my paper and I'm going to fold it over about 2 inches, 3 inches. 2 should be fine. I've matched it up at the top so I'll still have a nice straight line, and I'm going to crease it. This is about the width of like a bookmark, and I'm just going to cut right along that line. Save this little piece of paper for later, and you can turn your paper any way you want. Mine's just about a square right now. I want to make sure my fox is nice and big on this paper, so very lightly I'm going to draw a big circle in the middle of my paper as a guide circle for the fox's head. Now the first thing that I noticed when I looked at the picture of the fox is that its ears start very low on the head. They don't start at the top of the circle. You can see the top of the circle is way up here in the middle of the ear. So when I start my ears, I'm starting quite a bit down from the top. And they kind of curve outward. So first I'm just going to kind of start with my lines and get those to match. Foxes have very wide ears to catch all the noises so they can find mice and lemmings under the snow. So I'm going to make my ears nice and big. They come down to the side of the circle here. Now we're going to be making our animal, our fox here, look very realistic by using texture and shading. So before I can go any further, I need to work on his snout. So I have my extra piece of paper here. And I'm going to start with a curve for the top of the snout. I want it to be a very wide curve, so I'm going to go as big as my bookmark. Maybe a little sharper curve. Now his snout comes down, just kind of making a cone shape here. It begins to come down, and then it's going to round off. So I'm going to check this, just kind of hold it over my drawing and see if that looks like it's a good size. I think that's a pretty good size. I can always make it a little bit shorter if I need to. Now I'm going to look at the fox's nose on my picture, and he's got a pretty round nose because I can see the top and the front of the nose. So when I start his nose, I'm going to start a little way up from the bottom with another curve. And this is just the top of the nose. I always think of dog noses, and a fox is a kind of dog, is having two different parts, a top and a front. So for the front, I'm going to come down a little bowl shape. I'm going to put his little nostrils in, just one on each side, little curve. And then I can just darken that in or erase the line for the nostril. And then the little detail that comes down into the mouth. And that looks pretty good. So before I cut it out, I'm going to think about some shading and color on this, because it's a lot easier to color and hold on to when it's on a bigger paper. So I'm going to use my thin black marker, and I'm looking at the direction of the fur on the fox's face, and I think I'm going to have an imaginary line down the middle. I'm going to try and kind of keep the fur off of that line, but I want to add texture. And it's short fur on the fox's snout or muzzle. So I'm just doing these short little curved lines. And then I'm gonna, on the other side of my imaginary line, I'm gonna have my fur curving the other direction. By having the fur curved in the direction of the snout, it's gonna make it look three-dimensional also. So I want you to go ahead and make some little lines for the texture of your fur. You don't have to do a ton, but I'm gonna go all the way up the snout here. And I don't want it to look like a perfect solid line. Now I'm just going to do a little bit of shading, and the fox's muzzle is the orange fur on here. So first I'm going to shade with just a little bit of brown on the edges for my shadow. And then I'm going to blend my orange right into that. So you'll notice I'm coloring right into the brown. And I'm not coloring very hard. I've already got my texture on there. Now if I wanted to get really fancy and make the middle of the snout look like it's closer, I can take this apricot color and color across that middle. That's the high point. And that's going to make sure it stays lighter even when I color the orange crayon into it. Alright, so we've got our fur finished up, and we're just going to finish up coloring the nose. Now if this is a tight area for you, you might want to switch over to your color pencils so you can get in here just a little bit easier. But I left a little highlight on the top of the nose that I'm going to color with my gray crayon instead of my black crayon, just to make his nose look kind of wet, a little bit more realistic. Okay, so when you are done coloring it, you're going to go ahead and cut out the snout. Alright, I've cut out my snout, and when you place it on the face, you want just the very bottom of the muzzle to be lower than the circle, so you can see just a little bit is sticking out. If your muzzle's too long, you can always go in and trim a little bit off of the top side if you need to. We're not going to glue this down quite yet because we want to make it look like it's sticking out. And to do that, we're going to make a spring. So I'm going to cut off a thin strip of paper, just right from my extra paper here. And once I have that, I'm going to find the middle of the strip, and I'm going to fold it at the middle. And I'm going to fold it so it looks like a letter L. That looks pretty good. Alright, I'm going to place it down on my table because I always want to fold forward. I don't want to fold backwards at all. So right now, this piece is in front, and I always start with the one that's in back. So I'm going to start here, and it goes side to side. Notice how I fold it right against the other leg of the spring. This one goes down, across, up, and across, and you always keep folding forward, and if you leave it on the table, you won't be able to fold backwards. It'll be easy. Across, down, across, up, across, down. One more. Now mine's going to end up pretty even, but say you have one piece that is a little bit long and you don't have enough left to fold over. Just be really careful because you don't want to end up cutting your spring. and just trim that extra right off, and that'll be fine. You're going to use a tiny little dot of glue to close up your spring. There we go. We are going to glue the spring to the back of the muzzle. With one little dot of glue. Put a dot on the spring. And remember, when we place it on the face, we want it to be just below the edge of the circle. So I'm finding the middle of the face, and I'm going to let that snout come just below the edge of the circle. Now as I continue to draw the rest of my details, if I need to lift up the edges of the snout, it's really easy to do that also. I'm going to start by holding it down just a little bit so I can place the eyes on my fox, and I'm just going to start with a line. I'm looking at my picture and looking at where the fox's eyes are in the picture. They're right at the top of the snout. So this gives me a pretty good idea. I've got them even. That looks good. Oh, I need to come out just a little bit wider there. Alright, now I'm going to kind of make the shape of the eyeball. I'm going to round the back corner. And I'm going to put the pupil in. Now one of the things I notice is there's a shiny spot or a highlight right on the pupil. And I'm going to put those in. Lots of highlights on this fox eye. So I'm not quite making a circle, I'm leaving a little divot where I'll have a highlight spot on each side. Now we gotta start making this fox look hairy. So right underneath its eyes, it has some white fur. So I'm gonna come out on each side. Remember, the circle is just your guide. It's not a concrete wall, you can go right past it. It helps me if I turn the paper when I want to make the fur. I feel like I always make fur better in one direction than the other. So I'm just making little V shapes. Right up the side of the circle. Looking at my other details, there's a lot of fur in front of these ears. Lots of soft fur back here between the ears. There's really no solid lines in a fox, so now I'm just making it fuzzy. And I'm going to look for any details, so look for the details on the animal that you chose. Now, just like we did before, we're going to put our texture into our fox. So if I look, I'm going to start above the eyes, and the texture kind of curves right around the eyes. And the hair starts to get a little bit longer, so I can let my lines get a little bit longer as I come out towards the sides. So work on your texture. Now for the white part of the fox's face, I don't want to use my black marker because that's probably just too strong. So I'm just using my gray crayon to kind of give a little bit of texture and direction to the white part of the fox's face. You could also do this with your pencil too, if you want thinner lines. And remember, if you need to pull up the snout, you should be able to do that really easy. So we're going to get started on the shading of his head, and the areas that we want to kind of come forward, we're going to highlight those with our apricot crayon, or a lighter color. You could do it with white also. So I definitely want to pull these ears forward. And I'm coloring nice and hard when I do this. And it is a little bit messy, but that's okay. It's just going to add into the texture. Right above his eyes, where his eyebrows would be, I'm going to have some highlight areas too. Now, if you have highlight areas, you're also going to have shadow areas. So I want to push the sides of the face back just a little bit. So I'm going to add some shadow in there. There's a little bit of shadow right in the middle of the head where the fur kind of creases together. So I'm going to put just a little bit of brown in there. And maybe just a tiny bit up at the top. And now I can go ahead and blend my orange in. You have different oranges in your crayons, so feel free to use the orange that you feel is best for that area. Darker area might need a darker orange. A lighter area might need a light orange. So the last thing we have to do on this guy are the eyes. Now, a fox has some very detailed eyes. And I see some light brown, some dark brown in the eye. So I want you to look at a picture. Try and find a nice up-close picture. Don't color it all one flat color. Maybe I need to add just a little bit of orange to the eye too. So let's see, I think I'm going to put a light area. Looking at the eye, there's a pretty light area in here. And remember, these are highlights, so I'm going to try and keep those areas nice and white. You just decide where you're going to blend in your colors. Now, the last thing that I want to do is give my fox some human characteristic, much like Jan Brett's characters in her book. So I'm going to put my fox in a sweater, and you can decide what kind of clothing you're going to have your animal wear, or how you're going to make it look like a character in one of the books. So I'm starting the collar of my sweater with just a curve on each side and a curve right below it. And then I'm going to put the shoulders on. A fox is a pretty thin animal, so I'm not going out very far. Now comes the fun part, and I get to decorate. You decorate the clothing the way you want. Remember, Jan Brett would do a lot of research on different styles of clothing. She would even go to different Scandinavian countries and study their culture. To help with spacing, I'm using my finger to measure the gap in between my stars. And I think I'm going to do that for different lines on my sweater. I'm going to do a little bit of shading on my sweaters also. So you can see I've put the shadow in where I want it to look like the sweater creases in. I'm just going to use a little bit of white on the middle of the sections. And then I will take my lighter blue color and color over it for the medium tone. So if you want to make parts of your sweater look like they kind of sink in, you're going to use a light or a darker color. If you want to make areas look like they push forward, you're going to use a lighter color, just like we did on the fox's face. And it makes it so much more interesting and three-dimensional when you add just a bit of shading. As you finish up your animal, make sure you click on the slide attached to the assignment and follow the directions in the slide to take a picture and turn in your animal